You will never forget the moment you found it on his phone, but it also doesn't have to define your story.
Welcome to the Catholic Couch, the official audio podcast of the Catholic Counseling Institute. I'm Amber Pilkington, Catholic therapist, wife, and mother. Around here, we talk about real issues with real faith, blending the wisdom of the Catholic Church with the best of psychology, so you can find clarity, peace, and purpose in your relationships, your vocation, and everyday life. Whether you're folding laundry or driving the carpool, pull up a seat and let's go.
Whether it's his search history, his hidden app folder, a late night text that doesn't sit right, there's a before and an after. You can't unsee it. And while everything might look the same on the outside, something in you knows that something sacred just broke. If that's where you are right now, I want to begin here. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. And no, this is not something every man does. Please hear me say that as a Catholic therapist, as a wife, and as a woman who's walked with hundreds of others through this, betrayal trauma is not a metaphor. It's a real physiological, psychological, and spiritual response to the rupture of trust inside an attachment bond, especially in marriage. You might be having flashbacks, trouble sleeping, nausea, trouble concentrating, or waves of anger that feel completely out of proportion to the thing you just discovered. That doesn't mean you're emotionally unstable. It means your body is responding exactly the way God designed it to when something isn't safe. Dr. Barbara Steffens and Marcia Means were the first to use the term betrayal trauma in the context of pornography, addiction, and sexual betrayal. In their research, they found that nearly 70% of women in these situations met full diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Steffens and Means, 2009. And when they ran the data, they realized these women weren't just reacting to the behavior, they were reacting to the ongoing deception, the secrecy, the erosion of safety in the most intimate relationship of their life. That's not just psychology, that's theology. Because Catholic teaching has never said that the body and soul are separate. The Catechism tells us clearly that the human person is a unity of body and soul. CCC 364. So when you are betrayed sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, the rupture happens in your whole being, and your healing will have to include your whole being too. Which brings me to something that makes this episode different from some of the others out there. I'm not going to give you 5 quick tips to fix your marriage. I'm not going to tell you to forgive and move on. And I'm not going to tell you that you should be over this by now. Because healing from pornography, betrayal isn't linear. It's not just spiritual. It's not just emotional. It's not just psychological. It's all of it and more. You were made for communion. That's what marriage is supposed to be. A visible sign of God's faithful, life-giving, total love. When that sign is fractured through pornography, the pain that follows isn't just disappointment. It's grief. It's disorientation. It's spiritual confusion. And it's holy to name that. It's also holy to heal from it, not just with time, but with intention, with Jesus, with science, with community, with the sacraments, with the stories of women who've been where you are and didn't stay there. That's what this episode is for. We're going to walk together through the healing process, how Eucharistic adoration can calm your nervous system and heal your sense of spiritual safety, how trauma therapy, like EMDR or somatic work, can reconnect you to your body after feeling used or abandoned, how prayer journaling and praying the Psalms can give voice to the cries of your heart, and how saints like Saint Monica and Saint Rita and modern Catholic women can become companions in your pain, not as perfect models, but as real women who suffered and stayed faithful. This is not the end of your story. Let's begin with Eucharistic adoration. If you've been betrayed, especially through pornography, it can feel disorienting to walk back into prayer. The place that used to feel safe, maybe even your anchor, can now feel hollow or even painful. And not because you've lost your faith, but because everything in you is asking, where were you, Lord? That question doesn't make you faithless. It makes you wounded. And Scripture is full of wounded people who ask the same thing. King David said, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" Psalm 13:1. That is not a lack of trust. It's intimacy. Intimacy with a God who invites our real emotions, not just our reverent ones. And here's why I always begin with adoration when I walk with women through betrayal, because it is one of the few places where you don't have to say anything at all to be seen. When you sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament, especially after a rupture in your marriage, you are coming back to the real presence of a God who doesn't hide, a God who doesn't betray, a God who is fully, wholly, vulnerably with you. This is where trust begins to repair, not because you feel it all the time, but because you choose to be in the presence of someone who does not lie. But there's also something more, something psychological. We now know that trauma, especially relational trauma, disconnects the brain's pathways for safety and regulation. It heightens activity in the amygdala, your fear center, lowers function in the prefrontal cortex, your thinking center, and dysregulates the vagus nerve, which controls your sense of calm and connection. Porges, 2011. This is why women often describe feeling physically unsafe even after the threat is gone. The nervous system is still holding the memory of betrayal. But do you know what helps restore regulation? Stillness, gentle focus, rhythmic breathing, slowing the body long enough to be present. And do you know what happens when you sit in front of the Eucharist, especially in silence? Your breathing slows, your gaze softens, your sense of time changes. And even if you're not thinking holy thoughts or you're weeping into your scarf, you are teaching your body that this is a safe place. You are giving your nervous system a sacred template for trust. This isn't emotional escapism, it's incarnational healing. The same Jesus who touched lepers, who calmed storms, who wept at Lazarus' tomb, he is physically present in the monstrance, and he sees the part of you that shattered when your husband chose fantasy over fidelity. Eucharistic adoration isn't just good for your soul, it's good for your trauma. Some women tell me, but I'm too angry to go. I understand that, but here's the invitation. Go anyway, and say that to him. Tell him you're angry, that you're numb, that you're sick of being the one who always shows up, that you're tired of being the strong one. You will not scandalize Jesus. He has already borne your pain in his own body. And when you place your raw, aching self before him in adoration, you are not failing in faith. You are living it. Let that be your first step, not to fix, not to forgive, but to be held. Now let's talk about trauma therapy, especially EMDR and somatic work. Because while the sacraments heal the soul, we also have to care for the body that has carried the shock. Betrayal trauma doesn't stay neatly filed away in your thoughts. It lives in your muscles. It shows up in your stomach, in the racing heart when your husband walks in the room, in the way you flinch at certain tones of voice, in the knot that tightens in your chest when you think about intimacy. That's not weakness. That's survival memory. Here's how that works. When the brain detects betrayal, especially inside an attachment relationship like marriage, it fires up the limbic system, the part of your brain responsible for detecting threat. And that system doesn't speak in logic or language. It speaks in sensations, symbols, flashbacks, impulses. That's why you might feel panic when you see a certain time on the clock, or shame when you hear a door close, or nausea when you try to talk about what happened. That's not irrational. That's your body doing exactly what it was designed to do when something unsafe occurred. But here's the hard part. When the betrayal isn't followed by validation, safety, and repair, the body stays stuck in that survival state. It becomes like a record skipping. Your mind knows the betrayal happened, but your nervous system still feels like it's happening right now. That's where trauma therapy comes in, not to erase the memory, but to file it in the right place, to process it in a way your body can actually release. Let's start with EMDR. Eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. It's one of the most evidence-based treatments for PTSD and complex trauma. In EMDR, the therapist helps you access the distressing memory while engaging both sides of the brain through bilateral stimulation, like eye movements, tapping, or sound. This process helps move the traumatic memory from the fear-based, emotional part of the brain into the more rational, meaning-making part of the brain. Shapiro, 2018. Over time, that memory loses its emotional charge. It becomes something you can remember without reliving it. And for Catholic women especially, EMDR can be life-changing after betrayal. Why? Because the trauma isn't just about the facts, it's about the lies that got stuck to them. Lies like, I wasn't enough, or he chose this because I failed, or God must be punishing me. EMDR doesn't just process the event, it helps uncover the meaning you've internalized about yourself and reprocess that meaning into truth. So instead of I'm not enough, your body begins to believe I was always worthy of love, and I still am. Then there's somatic work, a broad category of therapies that help you reconnect with your body, release stored tension, and restore a felt sense of safety. This might look like breath work, gentle movement, grounding exercises, learning to notice what safety feels like in your body again, so you can actually receive love and peace instead of resisting them. The Catechism tells us the human body shares in the dignity of the image of God. CCC 364. That includes your nervous system, that includes your tears, that includes the way your hands shake when you talk about it. You are not overreacting, you are incarnate. And incarnational healing requires us to invite Jesus into our whole experience, not just our minds, but our muscles, not just our prayer, but our pain. Trauma therapy doesn't replace the sacraments. It prepares your body to receive them again without shutting down. Because when you've been betrayed, even something as sacred as the Eucharist can stir up fear if your body hasn't been taught how to feel safe again. Therapy makes space for grace. You are not weak for needing help. You are wise for pursuing healing. One of the most healing practices I recommend, especially in the quiet, lonely middle of the betrayal journey, is prayer journaling. Not as a productivity tool, not as another thing to get right, but as a way to tell the truth when everything around you feels confusing. Because betrayal has a way of making you question what's real, what was true, what was love, what was a lie, what was yours and what wasn't. And trying to sort all of that inside your head, especially when your emotions feel like a tsunami, just doesn't work. You need somewhere to pour it. You need a place to speak, even if no one's listening, even if your husband doesn't understand, even if your friends are uncomfortable. You need to be able to say, this is what it feels like to be me right now. That's why prayer journaling after betrayal isn't about scripting beautiful spiritual thoughts. It's about opening a blank page, lighting a candle if you want, and letting your heart speak, even if it's raw, even if it's messy, especially if it is. What I've found again and again, both personally and in the women I work with, is that when trauma disrupts the ability to speak out loud, the hand still knows how to pray. The page still holds space, and something in you knowing, I Bain, Dabiges, Detrai, Gen, Ekain, Gern, Der, Arsin, Dromakor, Shore shines, and your brain starts integrating thoughts. Your body slows its reactivity, and sometimes before you even notice, it becomes a place where God meets you. The Catechism calls prayer the raising of one's mind and heart to God. Es or say CCC 2559. And when you write honestly about your pain, your anger, your grief, even your numbness, you are raising your heart to Him. That counts as prayer. You don't have to start with thanksgiving or praise. You can start with, I don't know where you were when this happened. I'm hurt. I'm angry. I don't feel safe with you right now. That is prayer. That is relationship. And when you need help finding words, the Psalms are your inheritance. David, the same man who danced before the ark and was called a man after God's own heart, also cried out, "Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" Psalm 10:1. That is holy. That is canonized lament. And it means you are not alone when you can't find peace in prayer. There's a reason trauma therapists often recommend writing or speaking aloud phrases like, I am safe. I am not alone. This was not my fault. These aren't just mantras. They are true statements that restore dignity. And the Psalms do the same. They name terror, betrayal, and injustice. They also speak truth back into the places that feel lost. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. I often tell women to choose a psalm a week, not to study, but to live with. Write it out by hand. Keep it in your bag. Circle the lines that break you. Copy the ones that ground you. Let Scripture reparent your soul. Because when you've been betrayed, even the way you talk to God can feel disrupted. You might feel like you've forgotten how to pray. But writing, crying, whispering a psalm under your breath while folding laundry, that is prayer. And your honesty is an act of courage. When you no longer trust your husband or even yourself, you can still learn to trust your voice with God. Prayer journaling isn't about control. It's about communion. Let's talk about the saints, because if you've been betrayed, especially by something like pornography, it's easy to start reaching for spiritual examples. You want to know you're not alone. You want to know that faithful women have walked this road and come out the other side still whole, still holy, still themselves. But I need to say something clearly before we go any further. Sainthood is not codependency. Holiness is not enabling. And Catholic women are not called to silently suffer while sin destroys their home. We're going to talk about Saint Monica and Saint Rita, but not in the romanticized way they're often portrayed. We're not going to make them the poster children for martyr wives who just quietly bore injustice and waited for their husbands to change, because that's not what they did. Let's start with Saint Monica. Yes, she prayed for years for the conversion of her son, St. Augustine. Yes, she endured a difficult marriage. But what we don't talk about enough is that Monica was not passive. She did not sit in silence while sin ran unchecked through her household. She was persistent. She confronted evil. She prayed with fire and spoke with clarity. She moved cities to stay close to her son and confront his lifestyle. And when her husband's anger and infidelity disrupted their family life, she didn't excuse it. She responded with moral courage and protective boundaries. She didn't yell. She didn't shame, but she didn't disappear either. She showed us what it looks like to stay anchored in your dignity, even when the people around you haven't yet found theirs. Then there's Saint Rita. She's often held up as the saint who endured an abusive husband. And yes, her marriage was filled with suffering, but the part that matters most here is this. Rita did not confuse peacemaking with passivity. She was a woman of incredible interior strength. She spoke truth with love, and she protected her sons from perpetuating the cycle of violence. When they wanted revenge, she prayed for their souls, not for the vengeance they desired. She didn't minimize the harm that had been done. She prayed for conversion, and she set spiritual boundaries that broke generational sin. Neither Monica nor Rita pretended that everything was okay. Neither of them stayed silent to avoid rocking the boat. They didn't normalize sin in the name of peace, and neither should you. And here's the part I want every Catholic woman to hear. You can honor your marriage covenant while refusing to enable grave sin. You can love your husband while refusing to lie for him, cover for him, or be his therapist. You can pray for his soul without sacrificing your own stability, safety, or sense of self. This is where I also want to honor modern Catholic women, the ones I've sat with in therapy, the ones who show up in adoration even when their hands are still shaking, the ones who filed for separation when that was the only safe option, the ones who fought for healing in marriage, and the ones who've grieved the loss of a spouse who wouldn't do the work. These women are saints in the making too, not because they suffered silently, but because they suffered with Christ, and they let his voice become louder than the shame. If that's where you are, you're not failing, you're in formation. And I want to be really honest here, because the church is clear. While the marital bond is indissoluble, CCC 1640, you are not required to endure physical, emotional, or spiritual abuse. You are not required to maintain sexual intimacy when it violates your conscience, your body, or your dignity. Separation, even civil separation, can be morally legitimate in cases of serious harm, CCC 2383. That's not disobedience. That's discernment, and discernment takes time. Support, wise counsel, prayer, therapy, and a deep commitment to both truth and charity. So what does healing look like if you're waiting for a moment where it all feels clear, where your heart stops aching and your trust comes back all at once? I want to tell you something hard and holy. It doesn't happen like that. Not because healing isn't real, but because you were made to love in a way that is so deep, so good, so sacred, that when it's betrayed, the recovery has to go just as deep. And that's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to honor. The map of healing after porn betrayal isn't linear. It doesn't go in clean stages. It doesn't follow a schedule or reward you for being spiritually mature. It moves in spirals. It comes in waves. And it's shaped not by performance, but by presence. Your presence with yourself, your presence with God, and God's faithful presence with you. Some days that presence looks like Eucharistic adoration, where you say nothing at all. Some days it looks like EMDR therapy, where you cry harder than you ever thought you could. Some days it's journaling a psalm in your planner while your kids are eating cereal. And some days it's asking a saint, maybe Saint Monica or Saint Rita, or maybe someone you've never heard of, to walk with you so you don't feel so alone. There is no perfect Catholic healing plan, but there is a rhythm of restoration, a path that slowly helps you recover the parts of yourself that were shaken, silenced, or shattered. And here's what I've seen again and again. Healing doesn't always come in the form of a restored marriage, but it always comes in the form of a restored woman. A woman who learns to trust her instincts again. A woman who learns to pray without fear. A woman who stops apologizing for having needs. A woman who realizes her story isn't defined by her husband's sin. A woman who becomes more herself, not less, in the presence of Christ. So if you're in the early days and the pain is sharp and you're scared this will always feel this way, know this: you are not too broken, you are not forgotten, you are not alone, and you are not responsible for someone else's conversion. Your healing is not selfish. It is not optional. It is not secondary to your husband's recovery. It is the holy work of reclaiming your dignity as a daughter of God. And you don't have to do it alone. If this episode spoke to you, share it with another Catholic woman who's walking through something similar. Leave a comment, send a message, or just take a moment to breathe and remember, this isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of something sacred. And as always, I'll leave a place for you on the Catholic couch.